Am I supposed to tell, just as an introduction, a little bit about Peter Emerson, just 2 sentences, and then you start, Peter?
Okay.
This probably because we know, I mean, what can I tell you about Peter Emerson? Probably most of you know him better than me, but probably some don't. So from my side, Peter Emerson is first of all the director of the Borda Institute, and Borda counting means border voting. That's what the big passion of Peter Emerson is, that the pure majority voting is not the best voting system. And there are better voting systems, for instance, preference-based or consensus-based voting systems. And especially what we do today is this matrix voting system. And we know Peter Emerson from the last talk he did in the, it was actually the very first talk in the digital Adam Smith seminar. So there's one information I just got today when I was going to Wikipedia. I hope this is right. But what you should be aware of is that Peter actually was active as a politician by himself also. And he is, if I took this right, actually the founder of the Green Party in Ireland, the Irish Green Party in the late 70s. So yeah, that's the background of Peter Emerson. And today we will try out how this would be if we could vote, if even the Bundestag could vote now about the government. And this will be a very interesting experiment, I guess. So Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, Peter, to interrupt you.
Yeah, go on.
Maybe we just do, before you start the presentation now, sorry, the Zoom stuff. What do you think?
Oh, by all means.
Yeah?
Yes, yes.
Sorry to interrupt you all, but as this is today a really like a Zoom experiment, I think it's important, even before Peter is telling what it's all about, to introduce or kind of make a common sense about the Zoom and the Zoom system, because we want to kind of make an experiment today and try to go in several breakout rooms and experiment with the voting system that Peter will explain in a minute. Before that, I would like to give you an input into the Zoom functions, and also would like to ask you in which kind of role you want to participate in it. Okay, thank you very much. And Peter, the floor is yours.
Good, thank you very much. And thank you, Gregor, for those nice words, and Manfred, of course. And thank you to all the facilitators who have been spending a lot of time in getting ready for all of this, but especially my thanks to Eva, who really does, she's achieved an enormous amount of work. She does deserve a round of applause, if not indeed a pint of Guinness. Now, many people of my age are regarded or were called Wesses or Aussies, but I'm neither because I'm Irish. But I've been to Germany a few times, and the first time was in 1986, when I cycled across from Hoek van Holland, across the two Germanys and across the Iron Curtain on my way to Warsaw and then Moscow. And that's how I learned my 3 words of German, which was immer geradeaus. Now, there are lots of political parties in lots of electoral systems in the world. Some are not very good and some are okay. And the worst one of all is probably the binary electoral system that is used in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And it's candidate X, yes or no, and it's perfect if you have a one-party state. The English system, first past the post, is suitable for a 2-party state. But there is no post. If you have 50% plus 1 and 2 candidates are standing, then 50% plus 1 is a winner. But if there are 3 people standing, then maybe the winner will have only 33% plus 1. And if there are 9 people standing, then the winner could get in on 10% plus 1. And this figure is called a quota. But in first past the post, as I say, there is no post, and it's a pretty shocking system altogether. And then we jump to, well, the Netherlands, and they have PR, and the entire country is one constituency. So you have lots and lots of parties, some very big, and then not so big, and then average and small, and then tiny, a whole variety of parties, which can be problematic sometimes, but otherwise it's a nice idea. And we have PR in Ireland as well, which in one respect is even better because we are allowed to vote for more than one person of more than one party. But in one case, in one aspect, it's not so good because we have very small constituencies. So we have 2 or 3 big parties and a few small ones. But the German system is a hybrid. It's half first past the post and half PR. So the first past the post half will give you 2 big parties, and the PR bit will give you a few small parties. And maybe the situation is now changing slightly, but for many years, the 2 big parties have had greater representation than is probably their true position. What is quite extraordinary, however, is that while there is all this variety in electoral systems, there's hardly any variety in decision-making. There are lots of systems, but nearly everybody uses binary voting. And there are a couple of exceptions, but in almost every parliament of every democracy, they are taking decisions by majority vote. And hence you have an election, and then you have to have all these negotiations to decide whether or not you should have a majority coalition or a grand coalition or whatever. But I would like to say that there are other ways of making decisions, and there are other ways of other systems of governance, in effect. And if we look at the different methodologies, different voting procedures, some are used in decision-making, and some can also be used in elections. And there's either binary voting, which is majority voting, simple or weighted, and there are 2 types of majority voting, either option X, yes or no, which is very similar to the North Korean nonsense, or you can have slight improvement of option X or option Y. And then there are multiple choice systems, and there are quite a few, as we shall see. But I first want to just spend a couple of moments to point out that majority voting as such is pretty useless, and that therefore it should not be the basis of governance. So if we take a simple example, and in a plural democracy, then by definition, any controversy will have more than 2 options on the table. And if we take this simple example of 14 people talking about 4 options, and I've chosen a very controversial topic because 5 think option A is the best and 9 think it is the worst. And opinions on B are pretty divided as well. But C or D, oh, D, look, it's only got 2 first preferences, but it has all 12 second preferences. So option D is obviously the option which best represents the collective will of these 14 people. But what happens if we take a majority vote? Well, if we take a majority vote of the X, yes or no variety, the answer is nothing, because when there is no majority in favor of any one thing, there is a majority against everything. And if we take option X or option Y, well, the answer could be almost anything but the right answer. The right answer is D, and it doesn't appear. It's either... So majority voting is, yeah, it's useless. It's hopeless in this particular instance and in many another. And it also means that because you can get any answer you like, if you don't like D, then it is manipulable. And some politicians are manipulative, like Boris. And when the British Parliament last year voted on Brexit, in theory, it was his deal, Boris Johnson, his deal, yes or no. But in practice, everybody knew that it was X or Y. And Y was no deal. It was the most unpopular option on the table, if not on the planet. And anything would have beaten no deal. Anything, Canada plus, Norway minus, anything. So to say that there was a majority in favor of Boris Johnson's deal was nonsense, just nonsense, and nobody said a word. Quite incredible. Now, okay, sometimes you will get the situation where people do vote for their second or third preference as better than their third or fourth preference, in which case you might get the option D. But politicians normally like voting for their first preferences only, and especially, or only if, in expressing a second preference, it doesn't detract from their first preference. But there are these other possibilities. Pluralism is possible. You can have multi-option voting in quite a few different ways. And these two ways here, modified border count and Condorcet, they are the only two systems which always take all preferences cast by all voters into account. And they are the most accurate, and they give the answer D. And the modified border count identifies the highest average opinion. And an average involves every member of the Bundestag, not just a majority. So if this system were adopted, we wouldn't need all these talks about who's going to form a coalition of majority or grand or whatever. And we could follow the advice of a German, Nicholas of Cusa, who in 1433 suggested this points system of voting. And you could have an all-party system of governance based on, this, as I say, an all-point, a preferential system of voting. And it would mean that the people elect the parliament, yeah, that's fine. And then, well, the best way of doing things is to have another election, I suppose. You've got over 700 people in the Bundestag, and the members of the parliament then elect the government. And it's a little bit more complicated because you have to elect lots of people and then decide which job each one is going to have. So you have a matrix ballot paper. But first, I want to talk about the system that was invented by Nicholas of Cusa. And it's now called the modified border count after Jean-Charles de Borda, who was a scientist, and he did all the maths. And it works like this. If you cast only one preference, your favorite gets 1 point. If you cast two preferences, your favorite gets 2 points, and your second choice gets 1 point, and so on. So in a 4-option ballot, you can get 4 points for your favorite, and 3 for your second, and 2 for your third, and so on. So the system encourages the members of parliament to state not only what is their first preference, but also what are their compromise options. And if everybody states their compromise option, then you can find the collective compromise. And to put it into a mathematical formula, you have n options and somebody casts m preferences. So points are awarded to the first, second, and last preferences cast according to n minus 1. Unfortunately, even in his lifetime, this formula was changed to n minus 1. So you give your first preference 4 points and stuff the rest. And this is totally against what Jean-Charles was trying to do. And this is what Jean-Charles de Borda actually invented. And unfortunately, this is the same, is called the border count, but it's misnamed. And Jean-Charles is rolling in his grave. The modified border count is very good for decision-making, and it's okay for electing one person, but it's not proportional. So if we're having elections for more than one person, we have the quota border system. So if we have a mini Bundestag of 58 MPs, as we have today, then the quota is 4. And 4 can elect 15 ministers. And every group of 4 MPs can get a member into the cabinet. If it was 5, oh, you'd only have 11 members of the cabinet. And if it was 3, you'd have, 19. So the quota is 4. And if you have 735 MPs, then the quota is 56. And it works like this. The MP casts their preferences, 1, 2, 3, all the way down to 15. And then in the count, any candidate with a quota of first preferences is elected. And then any pair of candidates, and I'll explain this in a second, any pair of candidates with 2 quotas gets elected. And if seats are still to be filled, as they probably will be, then you just give them to the candidates with the highest MBC scores. So in a Bundestag of 58 members, let's say Miss K gets 5, which is more than 4, so that's a quota, so she gets elected. Jolly good. And if all 5 give their second preference to Miss M, while 3 people vote Miss M and K as their second preference, then the KM pair have 5 plus 3 equals 8 first second preferences, which is 2 quotas. So Miss M gets elected as well. That's the idea. It's a little bit complicated, but never mind. And then if we go to the matrix vote itself, it's the part one is an analysis, a QBS analysis to find the 15 most popular members, MPs. And the quota is 4. So with a party, if you have 12 MPs, that's 3. You can get 3 quotas elected, 3 cabinet members. But if you nominate 6 candidates, then each might only get half a quota. So nobody gets elected. Well, not at that stage anyway. So basically, QBS encourages the parties to nominate only as many candidates as they think they can get elected. Meanwhile, as we have just seen, the MBC encourages MPs to submit all 15 preferences. So the matrix vote is encouraging the MPs to cross the party divide. And this, I would argue, is an essential element of power sharing. And the ballot paper is like this, as we saw, and every MP, first of all, they choose 15 different members of parliament as their candidates, some from their own party and then a few from the other parties, by all means. And then they decide which one they want to be in which job. And so if they want Fred to be in justice because Fred's a lawyer or whatever, then okay, you put a letter A into that column opposite that row. And that's it. So the matrix vote analysis count, first of all, we said it's a QBS to find the 15 most popular members. And then you do the MBC analysis by giving 15 points to a first preference, if they've filled in all, and 14 to a second preference, add up all these points, and you get a whole load of sums all over the place. And it could be a little bit complicated, but it's not really, because you just choose the biggest sum is 90, but there are 4 of them. Well, that doesn't matter either, because it means Jan gets defense and there's no contention there. And Jane gets the, hang on, I got something here. Yeah, Jane gets the environment, there's no contention there. There's a bit of contention for the Chancellor. We have 2 90s, both trying to be Chancellor, but Joe is more popular than Jean. So, okay, Joe gets the job. And we have, oops. So we have 3 appointments and 3 people elected. And it now means that any other sums in that column or in that row are now redundant. So gradually the paper, the page gets a little bit clearer. And even though the next highest number is 80, but that one is redundant, so we get only these 2 80s, and that one has disappeared. And no contention here. Jim gets foreign affairs, Jack gets the economy, and yet more numbers are now redundant, like this 50. So when we move to the next one, that 50 has gone. And again, we have June getting food, as no contention there. And James gets development, that's fine as well. Bit of a problem here, but not really, because Jill has 2 50s, but the finance gets more points than Labour, so she gets finance. And this 50 is now redundant as well. So when we move to the next page, it's now 20s, and that one's no contention. Bit of a problem here, maybe, but Labour gets more points than Interior, so Labour it is. And we then move on to the last figures of 10, no contention on those either. So we now have 14 ministries appointed, and we have 14 candidates elected. We have 2 people left contesting the final seat, and basically Jamie gets it because he is 11th as opposed to Jingo, who is 13th. So Jamie gets justice by default. And that's it. It's a little bit more complicated in practice, but that's the idea. So tactics, and this is where you folks will have a job today. A party with 4 MPs, which is 1 quota, they could cast all their first preferences for their nominee, let's say Miss I. And if they do that, then Miss I will get elected. What job she will have, we don't know yet, but she will definitely be a member of the cabinet. A party with 8 MPs, which is 2 quotas, could have 2 candidates. Let's say Miss I and Mr. J. So you could have 1 quota for Miss I and 1 quota for Mr. J, so both get elected in stage 1. Or you could give 2 quotas and all of them give a first preference for I and a second preference for J, but they make a pair and Miss I gets elected in stage 1 and Mr. J in stage 2. Good enough. De Groningen with 9 MPs, well, that's 2 quotas and a bit. So they could use the bit either to support their nominees or to support a third candidate and hope for the best, or as a bargaining chip in negotiations with another party. It's up to them. There was a lot of choice. And finally, SPD or CDU, they have 16 MPs, so that's 4 quotas. So they could have 4 candidates, I, J, K, and L. And either they vote 1 quota for each, so all 4 get elected in stage 1, but all 4 are on the same sort of degree of support, or they could have 2 quotas for I and K and 2 quotas for J and L. So I and J are elected in stage 1 and K and L are elected in stage 2, but that's a total of 4 ministers as well. Or they could give 4 quotas of first preferences to Miss I. All hail to the chief, and 2 of them vote for I and J, and 2 of them vote for I and K. So I gets elected in stage 1 with a huge number of first preferences, and J and K get elected in stage 2, but that's a total of only 3 ministers. So the party should beware the personality cult. Huh. So every party, you choose your nominees and for which ministries, and then how to cast your top preferences, and then whether or not to negotiate with another party, and what are you going to do with it, and etc. And then which candidates of which parties are going to get your lower preferences, and then you fill in the ballots. And we did it like this. Here's the full Bundestag with all these MPs, and here's the mini Bundestag with just these. And so this is in proportion to the main Bundestag. And in theory, if this was being done in the Bundestag, you would have every MP would have a vote. And then you divide this number by the Bundestag quota, and you see how many quotas each party has got. And it's 4 and a bit, 4 and a bit, and so on. And in our mini Bundestag, yeah, we divide this number and produce a smaller, more manageable number. And then we divide this number by the quota for the mini Bundestag, and we get 4 and 4. And this row should be pretty well the same as that row, which it is. And then in theory, in the SPD breakout room, you have maybe 16 MPs. You're representing 16 MPs anyway, and in theory, every one of them could have a vote. But filling in 16 ballot papers is a bit tedious, really, and especially as probably the ballot paper for any one quota of is going to be the same. So we've devised 4 big ballot papers, and we've got big ballot papers and small ballot papers. And a big ballot paper will be counted 4 times, and a small ballot paper will be counted only once. So you don't have so much work to do. And the SPD breakout room will fill in 4 big ballot papers, and so the CDU and the Green Party with 9, well, that's 2 big ones and 1 small one. And the FDP is 1 big one and 3 small ones. And you add them all up and you've got 57, which is the same as that. So just one small complication, if you think it's not yet complicated, and that is when we go back to this slide, and do you remember we had 90 points and we got 3 people elected to these 3 ministries, and Jean lost out. She had 90 as well, but sorry, she lost. And Joe, he had 80, and that's quite a lot as well. And he lost out too. But doubtless the party members for both Jean and Joe would like these two to have a fairly senior position in the cabinet, and not just to finish up with food or something. Not that food isn't important, but you know what I mean. So the way we do it is that we list the letter A as our first priority. If you're voting for Joe, you want Joe to be Chancellor, so you give Joe an A for Chancellor. But you can also write the letter B in finance or interior foreign affairs, whatever you like. So if he does lose his bid for the Chancellor, then his votes, his points will be transferred to his B ministries. And it's the same with Jean and so on. So when you're filling out your ballot paper, we suggest that the biggest parties should also put in the letter B, but probably only for your top 3 or 4 preferences. You don't have to do it for the rest. So just to cover that possibility. So that's it. Collectively, if it all works out, you get a government of national unity. Every party is proportional and every individual minister is fit for purpose. So now you go into your breakout rooms, and you will all have an expert facilitator, one who knows everything about the matrix vote. I'll be with you to help you as you go along. And I wish you luck. Thank you very much.
Oh.
So I leave it now to the facilitators. I will start the sessions now. Just to the structure, there will be a nomination process and then a time for negotiations and a time to fill in the ballot papers that Peter Emerson was explaining right now. And if somebody disagree with this suggestion, please let me know now, then I can remove it from the breakout rooms if you want. Okay, then I start them now. See you.
Is anybody filling out ballot papers yet?
No, not as far as I can see. They're still, I've just been to a negotiation.
That's fantastic.
And that was between SDP and the Greens.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going quite nicely. And by all means, if you want to have a look in as well, just ask Ava to put you. No, you're quite happy.
Just I can predict that we will have 12 nominees of 12 members very quickly. Every single big ballot, we will get a quota.
Yeah.
So as there's 12 big ballots, we will get 12 answers quickly.
Yeah.
And it'll be the other 3 that could probably take all night.
So they are quite it's actually they have quite fun. The FDP does not want to negotiate with the CDU.
Oh, CDU tried, did they?
But the FDP says no, thank you. So, but we have 15 minutes left when we stick to the 45 minutes that we had, but it's already 6:05. Okay, but we said the negotiation should be ended at 6:15. Okay, it's fine, I think.
Can I have now, can you put me into, who haven't I seen yet? Put me into FDP?
Yes, you can go to the FDP. The FDP is funny, they are dictators, but 1 second.
So I've now had a look at pretty well everybody, and everybody seems to be doing pretty well, pretty good.
Okay, so I think Perry's just going to finish ours for us, and I don't know who else. Just a minute.
We might actually need like 2 more minutes because we have 3 candidates for nomination left, and we would be finished. So if it's possible to get us back with Klaas and Michael, maybe Would it be possible?
It's a matter of everybody, I think, because like we wanted to start the discussion, isn't it? But
let them go ahead, and then it's a more complete process. That's all I'm suggesting.
Yeah, I'm sure we can't be the only ones.
Us too, please.
so that, sorry, I didn't, that means what? Because
We all want 3 more minutes.
We all want
Yes.
another 5 minutes. Yeah.
all.
No.
3 is okay.
Yeah, well, then we want it as well.
So
Hurry
the
up. Hurry up.
Well, the people who have to fill in the most nominations will want the greatest amount of time.
It's too much heckling.
Okay, that's getting difficult.
So Eva, if you put them all back into their parties,
We try to. Okay, but it means you only get 5 minutes. Okay.
Yeah,
I'm fine.
it's fine.
Okay, so I try
No.
to. I never moved so many people in so in such a rare time around.
But you are doing a marvelous job, like a director of a huge TV company.
So the idea now is, my understanding, there's Gregor, perfect timing.
Oh,
Sehr
did
gut.
wait for me.
Yes. Because my understanding is, so there are the last ballot papers coming out. The idea is that now there's a chance of discussion about the experiences during Charles tries to get a first analysis of the voting done, right?
that's right.
Okay, so Gregor,
So should
But
I moderate the discussion
you-
or should
yes.
probably Peter does?
or
So
I don't care.
Do we
As a
we
man.
just let every party tell their war stories about the discussions and what they were negotiating? I have a personal question to the CDU actually. Did the CDU manage to agree on if they want to support Armin Laschet at all or not? This would be interesting compared to what happens in real life these days.
So I have to speak. I was the only one determining what the CDU was doing. So and my idea was that there was an offer you can't refuse from the FDP, who started nominating Markus Söder as the chancellor. And then my idea was, well, let's dump Armin Laschet and see if we can get away with the FDP and Markus Söder. Yeah?
So at the end of the day, it was the FDP defining Markus Söder should be the recommendation for the chancellor. And
Yep.
you followed this
Yes.
just in order to have more voices together with FDP.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay.
Okay, so I had to speak for the FDP. Florian speaking here,
Mhm.
and okay, came with incomplete information. I thought the CDU team was much larger, and I just wanted to be the bad guy to nominate the Bavarian and to steer some. Yeah, well, at the end it turned exactly out that way to not have Armin Laschet.
Yeah, it turns out, I made two questions. The first question, why Söder and not Merz? He is still in the game, isn't he also?
No, he
But-
wasn't in the game.
Huh?
He wasn't in the game.
Not in our game here.
Yeah.
But what turns out that successful at the end was the fast moving move, wasn't it? You were just quick. And regardless if the CDU team is small or large, the FDP made the first step in nominating Söder and by that influenced what the EU did then. Just in,
No,
and-
actually, Laschet was nominated first, and then I couldn't. Then I nominated Söder second.
but Laschet was not nominated by CDU.
Yes, he was.
We started with that first, and then we changed our minds.
Aha.
FDP induced.
Okay. And all this happened with a bilateral negotiation between the two parties, or was it just in seeing the nomination list and like a coordination without negotiation?
The last thing, and then we wanted to negotiate further with the FDP, but they refused.
Florian?
Yes.
Okay.
I would say we only,
I
I was the facilitator there, but the only reason was that I suggested that if Florian went, I would be left alone to discuss with myself.
Can I interject? Sorry, the Green Party, you seem to have put Habeck at the top of both of your big ballots, which means he now has 8 quotas rather than necessary 4. Is that what you intended to do?
Yeah, I think we in shortage of time we just copied. We did paste and copy. So rather in the second big ballot paper, change these names.
If I change in the second one, okay.
Yeah. Change
Habeck
both the name and the ministry.
Habeck and Baerbock, their order in the second one, that will give you Habeck being elected and Baerbock being elected with 4 each.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we forgot about the importance of the first.
Well, that's how you're going to get your first ones in.
Yeah, exactly. But well, we thought it's only the difference between 15 and 14 points, but it's not.
No, it's not. It's if you get a quote, you're in.
But we still found it quite hard to understand all of the game and which tactics would be best.
Let me back to me counting.
Please, thank you very much.
So maybe keep with the Green Party with our discussion and our war stories. May I ask you, did you manage in negotiation with any other party that anyone else, any other party, did vote also for Habeck or Baerbock? Did you?
We negotiated with the SPD, and they asked us to support Olaf Scholz as chancellor, especially because they expected a tight race with a candidate from CDU. And we felt pretty secure about our first 2 candidates on the ballot list, not going for chancellor, but going for ministries. So we especially asked them to support our 3rd candidate.
Yeah. And it's this
in order
end. Yeah.
Pardon?
I didn't want to interrupt you.
No, we had 3 candidates and 2 on first preference, and the 3rd one there we are not sure of getting the 3rd candidate in, so we wanted as many SPD votes for the 3rd candidate. At least that was more or less our tactic.
And if it turns out at the end, if it succeeds, we will see afterwards. So you just know that the other party did this after the agreement of your negotiation, but if the total amount of voices is then enough, you don't know yet. No one knows yet.
And in theory, the Green Party had 2 quotas and +1, and the FDP had 1 quota +3. So if they combine the 1 with the 3, they then have a quota between them, and they could get another candidate elected if they all coordinate their efforts. Yeah.
But our time for negotiation had run out when we negotiated with the SPD.
So SPD is the special word. So we didn't talk to SPD voters yet. Who was negotiating for SPD?
Nigel?
Sorry, what was the question?
The SPD.
Oh, sorry.
FDP.
SS. The one negotiating with the Greens.
Ottoman, Vanessa, what was our approach to negotiation?
I think it's mainly to come to get the support of the Green So we even gave them the chance to get the Foreign Affairs Ministry, just to also see that the FDP will not be in conflict with our choices.
Mm-hmm. So at the end, it turned out that the SPD and the Green reconciled with each other, and on the other side, CDU and FDP. Mm-hmm. So was there any negotiation between, say, FDP and SPD? Crosswise?
No.
No talks and no negotiation at all. Okay.
Mainly because there was no time anymore, but this would be the next time.
Mainly a time issue. It's a time issue.
Okay.
I mean, you know, allotting time to actually choosing your candidates and then discussing it with another party in the group will double the length of time.
Mm-hmm. Yes, one of the limitations of the role play is that we did say that any one party could only have one negotiation. Whereas in real life, of course, you might have all sorts of negotiations going on.
In our final ballot, we did actually nominate some Greens, and we did nominate some SPD. This is FDP. So FDP, without any negotiations, did spread goodwill around.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, if there was more time, then that could have been firmed up more.
Okay, so it will be very interesting what comes out. It's a total sum now. Who else did we have? We had the Linke also, and AfD we didn't have. So 6 parties I count now. Wasn't there a 7th also? Did we had 6 or 7 parties?
We had 6.
6. Okay, so the Linke is still there. Is there any more story about the Linke? Did you have any negotiation with any one of the others, or was the Linke just for themselves?
Let me talk on behalf of the Linke. I was also facilitating with Miriam there. There was no negotiations. We did have a few technical problems. Basically, we put together the nomination sheet, and then we did a copy and paste on the 3 votes, small votes that we had. And it was shared amongst the other parties. I think Charles has got his hand up waving.
Yeah, the CDU, you have done the same as Green Party. You have given me 4 tables which are the same. Therefore, Marcus Soda is going to get 16 quotas, which is way too many.
Yeah, which means that these quotas are wasted.
Which means that these quotas, he'll get in with 4 of the 16, the other 12 are wasted.
Charles, we did the same for lack of time. Can you do the same to our ballot papers that you did for the Greens?
Like, I can if they're all the same.
They are. There's only one.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean the tables are all the same, which they are.
Yeah.
So I will make that alteration. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Let me work on.
So is this a question of some minutes, or how long does it take for you to accelerate or aggregate now the whole total result?
Probably about 5 weeks.
5 weeks? Okay. so real life.
When the parties fill in their ballot papers so badly, a tough job for Charles.
So actually, what is your experience now to the whole group? I'm not sure if the experience of the role play is now really that those negotiations are so much leaner and more straightforward and directly and less complex than the real life coalition negotiations we see now. Of course, they are also demanding and you don't know how long they take and so on, but you have the same type of multiple bilateral reconciliations and negotiations, don't you? And this also might turn out to be quite complex, isn't it? So Peter, probably you want to comment on this.
The the limitations of the exercise that we've done is, yeah, I think it becomes clear to us all that in real life you would need, yeah, obviously longer time to negotiate, and so the SPD go and talk with the Greens, and maybe they get some success, but not a lot, and then they talk to the FDP, and then CDU is trying to talk to them as well, and in real life the discussions that would be taking place within parties and between parties would be, yeah, pretty complex. And the other thing that we have been unable to do here is, as we mentioned earlier, we're just treating everybody as in the CDU, CSU as the same, when as we know, this is not the reality. And every political party probably on the planet have got their little differences of nuances and ambitions and whatevers. So in real life, it would be more complex. And
sorry.
Yeah, go on, Charles.
For the CDU, you voted for Peter Altmaier. Which party is he in?
CDU.
CDU.
He's in the CDU.
Mm.
Okay. Right. I will have to find him.
He's on the list.
Yeah, you won't miss him.
He's very heavy. Very faithful man.
The amount of choice that, I mean, as you know, in the present way it is done, well, if we look at the British system for just a second, if people don't mind, and Boris Johnson, a few days ago, he had a reshuffle. And so he goes into the closet and he alone decides who is going to be doing what, and which ministers to sack and which new ministers to appoint. And the whole thing depends upon him and his will and his whim and maybe his bank account, I don't know. But it's an appalling situation where in the name of democracy, we give so much power to one individual. And he's often been called, well, in British politics, they use the term the elected dictator. And that's what it is. You elect a premier and then you give that premier this incredible amount of power. And if we had the matrix vote instead, then the power would be with the members of parliament. And the cabinet chosen would be 15 individuals. And maybe some of them don't like each other very much, but maybe people in society sometimes don't like each other very much, but we all have to live together in society. And our politicians should be able to do the same. And if they are elected to work together, then as Democrats, that is what they jolly well should do. And so the choice that is involved in this matrix vote is huge. Because in real life, every MP would be able to choose any one of 735 members to be any one of 15 ministers, and then to choose any one of 734 members of parliament to be any one of 13 ministers. And the choice, that the different number of different ways of filling in a matrix vote ballot is literally in the millions and probably billions. But it means that the choice of the boss is, the power of the boss is reduced, which is what democracy is meant to be all about.
So we have some raised hands. Nigel was the first one.
On this matter of how much time it takes to choose, myself and Peter, we are from Paul, we are from New Zealand, and here we have the mixed member proportional voting system, and of course leading up to to an election, the parties involved form a party list, and any potential candidate has a ranking on the party list, from one being the top weighted candidate to the bottom, which would be maybe in the 50s or 100s. So that ranking list can be made in advance of an election. And it seems to me that the same here, that FDP, CDU, or all the parties can make their own ranked list in advance. It doesn't, that means that you're following that ranked list and you don't have to negotiate that part of it.
Yeah, that comes, the New Zealand system is exactly like the German system. And it both consists of two parts, both consist first past the post and second bit is PR, and both have 50% elected by first past the post and 50% elected by the PR bit. And then the overall picture is PR. So if you have in the first past the post election, if you don't get the proportionality that is represented in the second part, then you adjust the number and you have additional seats as well. And the present Bundestag has over 100 additional seats to make sure that that proportionality is maintained. But that's in the election.
Sorry, Peter, another question. The SPD, you've only filled in the first table. I don't seem to have the second and third and fourth table.
I mean, that's why I said in the covering email, multiply by 16.
Well, then you're going to have 16. Will I do, therefore, take the first table and do 1, 2, 3, 4 again?
Well, and that was why I was asking you to do for the SPD what you did for the Green Party.
Okay, I'll do that.
Thanks.
Yeah, going back to where we were, you have the election, and then you get the Bundestag, and you have 735 MPs, and whoever was on the list of whichever party, and whether they were elected by the first past the post bit or the PR bit, by this stage doesn't matter. They are all MPs in the Bundestag, and some of them have personal ambitions, and some of them are a little bit more from Bavaria or whatever the variations that exist. That's fine. Let them exist. And then they start negotiating, and they do have their internal party structures. And within each party, you will have pretty intense debates going on, as we have at the moment, as to what is their best policy and how can they best pursue their party advantage and so on. This is all absolutely natural and fair enough. But the difference here is that the power remains with the MPs in the Bundestag, all 700 of them. And it's not with the party leader or the Boris Johnson or any other person who thinks that they're so powerful. And that's one of the advantages of it. And I do think it is more democratic. And also the fact that a party can pursue its own vested interest by cooperating. And when you have the present structure of forming a majority coalition, and then it's, well, are you with us or are you against us? And the whole thing becomes binary, and it might take ages, as well as in the Netherlands when you have so many parties, and it can take ages. But if you have this idea, like in the Bundestag, and if five political parties want to cooperate in such a way that they do not support the AFD at all, then they can, and they cooperate vis-a-vis the AFD, but they don't cooperate as to who is to be chancellor. And there you have big competition between CDU and SPD, and that's fine. So you compete where you want to compete, and you cooperate where you want to cooperate, and who cooperates with who and to what extent and so on. That's all in the land of the possible. But it just puts politics onto a more nuanced interpretation. And people can, yes, as I say, they can cooperate with this bit and not so much on that bit and not at all on that, something else and whatever. And to introduce this variety into the politics of a country, I think is important. We're all pretty different one way or another. And I think we should have a political system that is more human and recognizes the diversity of our species. Does that help?
Just one question. What do you do with the idea of collective responsibility in the cabinet? Suppose you have got the finance ministry and the development ministry in the hands of two parties who have extremely different views as to what to do, but they have to collaborate within cabinet and take a collective view. Now, under your system, could a minister disagree with the government's position publicly?
The question of collective responsibility is shared by the entire parliament, not just by the cabinet. The parliament has been elected by the entire country to do what is best for the country and so on. And that parliament has the responsibility to do the policies which best reflect the political will. And if you have the people, if they want something or other, and then the people who represent, the politicians who represent those people should, their opinion, their average opinion, the option with the highest average preference, if the electoral system was fair, then the option with the highest average preference amongst the politicians will be very similar to the option that would get the highest average preference if everybody was to vote in a multi-option referendum or whatever. So collective responsibility, is what is shared by the entire parliament, not just in cabinet. And when the cabinet is discussing some policy or other, just because the minister here happens to be from this party and the minister there happens to be from another party, doesn't mean to say that there are only two options on the table. And any option that is going to be accepted, which is going to get the consensus of the cabinet, is going to require cross-party support. And if you are talking about whatever it is, transport or economics or whatever, then doubtless, well, you might have the situation when you have 6 parties involved that you have 6 policies on the table. That's fine. And you have a discussion about 6 policies. And you can amend them and change them and tweak them and composite them. And you might even get to the stage where you delete something if everybody agrees, including the original proposers. And you just create a completely different atmosphere. You're no longer talking about reducing everything to a binary vote and people have to take sides and et cetera, et cetera. It's a different way of doing things. And I mean, it is extraordinary when you think about it that in life generally, nowadays, we use instruments, whether you're talking about doctors or scientists or whoever, and they use precision instruments and they're calibrated in degrees or microseconds or whatever it happens to be. But politicians use a blunt tool and it's yes or no, black or white. And this blunt tool, as I tried to show at the beginning, is just so blunt that sometimes it is incapable of producing the right answer, just useless. And if we did have preferential voting, and if you have 6 options and you're casting preferences on 6 options, there are actually 720 different ways of voting. And that should be able to cater for most opinions and nuances and whatever. It is a precision instrument. And we need a precision instrument in order to get the consensus of the cabinet and of parliament, of whatever. And if you have this precision instrument, it also means if you're identifying the option with the highest average preference, it might be the first preference of very few. But if it's the second preference of pretty well everybody else, that'll do. That's fine. That's what politics is all about.
But generally speaking, what we're talking about here is a rigorous reappraisal of political identity, isn't it?
Yeah.
People's identity, and especially identity in politics, is something that's very, very difficult to improve. Is not the word, but get them to have a look at. You know, letting go of their identity, having a little more humility, being less adversarial. It's extremely difficult. It's incredibly noble, yes, but very difficult to do in a culture of such political identity as we have.
Yeah, it is. But my main argument is that given COVID and climate change, we have got to the stage where the human race has got to cooperate if we're going to survive. And so this whole idea of multi-option voting and matrix voting and so on, this is all part of creating a polity, a political structure by which we can cooperate, by which we can survive. And it means people do have to compromise a little, that nobody's going to win everything, but nobody's going to lose everything. Yeah,
Okay.
it's a different ball game. Yes, Charles.
Can I give you a halftime score?
And we will certainly communicate the full results to everybody just as soon as we get them. And thank you to all the facilitators as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Peter. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Oh, good evening. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye. Have a nice evening.